Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Alongside 20 members of our Temple Israel community, I recently had the honor to travel from Atlanta to Anniston, Birmingham, Montgomery, and Selma, Alabama, tracing the paths of the civil rights movement and those who risked everything to pursue justice. Some of the stories you will hear tonight are difficult. The stories are painful and the images are unsettling. And some of what you will hear is beautiful. Messages of light in the darkness and testament to the human capacity to choose love in the face of hate. Our sacred task is to bear witness with open eyes and open hearts. To be a witness is not a passive act. It is a moral obligation. It demands that we listen, reflect, and allow these truths to reshape how we live and how we work to repair our world. A quick but very sincere special thanks to Tali Putterman and our tour guide Avi Edelman and our bus driver Henry, who helped put together and lead this powerful experience. And without further ado, I want to invite up several of our participants to share some reflections on the moments of our trip that moved them.
We began our journey in Atlanta. I'm Ellen Messer. We began our journey in Atlanta. We visited the Martin Luther King Jr. historic site, his childhood home, Ebenezer Baptist Church, and the King Center. Dr. King and Coretta Scott King lay at rest surrounded by flowing water, echoing justice rolling like a mighty stream, which also helps to prevent vandalism. They're in the middle of the water, which unfortunately is very prevalent, as we witnessed in the destruction of the eternal flame set on the side of the paths, which had been extinguished by some nasty act and not yet restored. We then toured the Temple, a Reform congregation bombed by white supremacists in 1958 for its civil rights leadership. They call it the bomb that healed. The outcome produced broad-based political support for the synagogue and denouncing of vicious bigotry and racism from local, state, and national officials and much of the public. A good outcome, not necessarily replicated elsewhere, where synagogue leaders were often instructed by their boards to tone down their civil rights rhetoric. That first day grounded us. This journey was not only about learning history, but about confronting our shared responsibility and the deep connections between Jewish values and the ongoing struggle for equality. Every site we visited carried Torah connections. Be a blessing, like Abraham. Generosity and hospitality, like Rebecca at the well. And very basic sustenance, recalling how prisons served black-eyed peas 3 times a day to these African-American prisoners, echoing Jacob's lentil stew offered to Esau in this week's Parshat Toldot. We also saw how creating signs on the land marks history and relationships, as when Jacob and Laban set stones to seal their non-aggression pact in Vayetze, next week's Parsha. Finally, there is the pervasive question of who is a stranger and alien. Abraham among the Hittites in Hebron. What is their status, the status of African Americans in relationship to others who live and have roots in the land?
I'm Jen Grella. From Atlanta, we traveled to Anniston, Alabama, where one of the most violent Freedom Ride attacks took place. In May of 1961, the first 13 Freedom Riders boarded 2 buses in Washington, D.C., bound for New Orleans. 7 of these riders, 2 white men, 1 white woman, 3 black men, 1 black woman, were on the Greyhound bus that stopped in the station in the map dot of Anniston, Alabama. While in the narrow alley next to the station, the bus was set upon by a violent Ku Klux Klan mob that attempted to board the bus and beat the riders. The mob slashed the bus tires and followed it out of town and down Highway 202 for 6 miles, knowing that it would have to pull over when the tires went flat. In the spirit of gruesome entertainment typical during lynchings and beatings, a mob of men, women, and children spectators stood watching as a crude Molotov cocktail was thrown into the bus. The doors of the bus were pinned shut by the terrorists chanting, "Burn them alive," as the passengers tried to escape the flames and choking smoke. A 12-year-old white girl, Janie Forsyth, from a nearby store ran forward with water to help them. She was run out of town for her courage. 65 years later, we stood in that alley beneath a mural that read, "Could you get on the bus?" We listened to the testimony of 95-year-old Georgia Calhoun, who witnessed the violence and has spent her life working to heal her community. Rabbi Slipikoff then asked us, would we have gotten on the bus? Could we join the movement in the moment? My reflection: does your moral compass lead you to board? In the dark, alone, is the solution to your individual calculus to stand up, stand by, or turn away? When they come for others, will you stand in the way, knowing they will eventually come for you?
I'm Ellen Fishman. As we traveled, we encountered the painful juxtapositions of the American South, places of breathtaking beauty holding histories of deep violence. The beautiful fall days and vibrant landscapes made it almost impossible to imagine the horrors that occurred here. I noticed the contrast of the Alabama River beside the Equal Justice Initiative's Freedom Monument Sculpture Garden, and read about the ghastly sound of chains of the slaves being transported on the riverboats, somehow ignored by other passengers. Likewise, when we walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge and then we drove across it later in the evening, the view from the bridge was magnificent in contrast to what had gone on the bridge. One striking impression was the contrast in how history is remembered. The Confederate section of the Selma Cemetery, which includes the grave of the first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, is beautifully maintained, with manicured grounds and clear markers, while others, like the Leo Frank Lynching Memorial and the site of the burned Freedom Riders bus outside of Anniston, felt hidden away and under-resourced, easy to overlook by the design of those who would rather not share that history. I couldn't overlook the stories of children. From slavery to Jim Crow to our modern prison industrial complex, the way that institutionalized racism has brutalized our children was on painful display. In the Legacy Museum, there were families torn apart by slavery. One photograph, which affected me deeply, was of a mother and her 10-year-old son crying and clutching each other after he had been sentenced to death. Today, the Equal Justice Initiative works tirelessly by advocating against harsh punishments for juveniles. Against the backdrop of pain, we were time and again introduced to people and organizations working to bring light and love into this ongoing narrative.
My name is Tony Tauber. This trip took me deeper into understanding the complexities of the Southern Jewish experience. In advance of our visit to Temple Emmanuel in Birmingham, we learned about Rabbi Milton Grafman, who led that congregation for almost 35 years and who was among the 8 clergy who signed the April 1963 Call for Unity open letter that expressed support of addressing racial issues, but emphasized working with the courts and not by boycotts and demonstrations. In response, Dr. King wrote a letter from a Birmingham jail arguing that direct action was warranted. Some months later, in September of that year, the infamous bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church led to the death of 4 young girls who Rabbi Grafman invoked during Kaddish on Rosh Hashanah a couple of days afterwards. We were hosted at that same temple over 60 years later to hear, alongside some of their congregation, from the 5th girl, Sarah Collins Rudolph, who was gravely injured during that attack, yet survived. 2 days after that visit, we went to Temple Mishkan Israel in Selma, Alabama, to hear of 2 remaining members of that congregation. Though they were young and not aware during the 1965 Selma Voting Rights March, they described at least one congregant from that time who was among the white community members deputized by the Sheriff's Department that assaulted civil rights activists during the aborted 1965 march from Selma to Montgomery, and who authored segregationist editorials in the local paper. These stories added to my understanding of Jewish experiences during the civil rights campaign of the mid-20th century, which had previously been informed more by the familiar photos showing Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel marching alongside Dr. Martin Luther King, or the tale of Andrew Goodman and Michael Schwerner, the 2 Jewish civil rights workers killed alongside a black colleague in Mississippi, which led to an FBI investigation and eventual trial of their killers. On the first day, while at the temple in Atlanta, Reform congregation, someone asked the rabbi about their congregation's stance on politics of today. She gestured in response, "Some people are over here, some people are over here," and that's a pretty common response today, which are mirrored in the realities of everything that we learned about in our past.
I'm Kathleen Cavell. I found 3 of the courageous women who told their stories to us especially unforgettable: Linda Blackman Lowry, Sarah Collins Rudolph, and Reverend Monica Spencer. Linda was the youngest marcher to complete the 5-day journey from Selma to Montgomery. Arrested 11 times by age 14, and she bears the scars. Sarah is the 5th little girl injured by the Klan bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham on September 15th, 1963, who lost sight in one eye, but was the only child to survive. And Reverend Monica is the Georgia State Director of Vote Riders, which helps find and pay for proof of citizenship to secure voting rights for everyone who needs their help. An aside by Linda stays with me. After she spoke to us for more than an hour, weeping a little, while recounting her mother's death in childbirth, which was avoidable if the whites-only hospital in Selma had provided needed blood, and her own savage beating at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which required 35 stitches to repair. After that recital, Linda mentioned in passing that every election day she drives all around Selma, picking up people she knows and people she doesn't. She tells them about her 11 arrests and about celebrating her 15th birthday on the march to Montgomery, when a court order finally allowed the marchers to cross the bridge safely. Then she tells them they have to vote because she needed 35 stitches to protect their right to do that. I just add one more sentence. We are very grateful, Rabbi, and Tali, and our splendid guide,
Avi Edelman, for enabling us to experience those stories and those sacred places and meet those heroes.
Thank you, everyone, for your words and for your commitment. There's a semi-joke that I learned from civil rights educators that says that the movement is too often taught that Rosa Parks sat on a bus, Dr. King gave a speech, a law was passed, and everybody cheered. Clearly, we have learned we are very far from that. If there's one thing that I can drive home after our journey is the emphasis that the movement is bigger than one person and requires diverse collection of skills and efforts sourced from every person committed to making a change. Joanne Bland, who joined her older sister Linda to fight for voting rights in Selma, and I am sure will continue to do so until her very last breath, is known to teach that movements for social change are like jigsaw puzzles. Every one is a piece, and if your piece is missing, the picture is not complete. You are the most important piece. So the invitation for us this evening and moving forward is to add our momentum to a movement. And you can do that right here with us at Temple Israel. You can volunteer with us to feed those who are hungry. You can break bread with us as we support Black-owned restaurants. You can be heard with us at GBIO listening campaigns. The list goes on and on and on, and if you don't hear something, tell us, we'll try and add it. May we find the courage to show up where we are needed, the strength to stay in the struggle, and the faith to believe that our collective efforts can bend the arc of our world closer to justice, dignity, and hope. Shabbat Shalom.